All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing this gospel with truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah Watt coming back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And in this lesson, right, I ultimately want to speak about, the American economy and the American way of life and how the Lord is ultimately destroying it, right? Completely bringing this place, to a screeching halt, right? Financially, economically, socially, globally, right? America is being brought down, and it's being, made, more and more evident, right, as the days go on, as, this war with, between America and Iran, continues to, boil. Right, there's been many different peace deals and treaty, or not treaties, but peace deals and so on and so forth, ceasefires that were, ultimately brought to the table, and they ultimately never, came to fruition because we are in a time of war, right? As we read Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 8, right? A time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, and a time of peace, and we're not in a time of peace, man, and that's been proven time and time again, right? That again, we are in a time of war, and this is highly affecting, these everyday Americans. And I got a couple articles, man, that I want to touch on, but we'll start right here in Jeremiah 51 and verse 12 in the NLT. It says, raise the battle flag against Babylon, right? And again, you got a lot of nations, right, that are ultimately looking at America, in a negative light, when, at one point America was, looked at as this, which you actually had people that really thought, right, that the streets of America were paved in gold, right? These people really, desired to be, in America, desired to, to come here and to partake of its, its merchandise and so on and so forth. As you read in Revelation, the 18th chapter, it goes into all the different things that, America, partook in, and these nations, wanted to be a part of that, you know, and ultimately drank of that wine. But see, as we read that the nations, are realizing, that wine that they drank was ultimately just bullshit, and now they're looking at America's, with that side eye, man, you know, to the point where now these nations really want to, ultimately, rid, right, rid the world of that American empire, if you will, right? It says, raise the battle flag against Babylon, reinforce the guard, and station the watchmen. Prepare an ambush, for Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shai, will fulfill all his plans against Babylon, right? And the plan is what? For America, right, to ultimately be destroyed, right? As you read in the scriptures, it tells you, right, that America will ultimately be as when, the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The Lord ultimately destroyed, ancient Sodom and Gomorrah, right, in the neighboring cities, and that place, right, is still not inhabited by people, right? It's ultimately a place, for, desert creatures, right, to dwell, right? And from time to time, those sulfur balls that the Lord ultimately threw down and destroyed the place, the Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities with, right? They still catch fire every once in a while, man. You know, letting right, as a sign, a memorial, if you will, of what the Lord, will ultimately do, to, a wicked society. And see, America is ultimately going to be the same, you know. America is ultimately going to be destroyed, except it's going to be by, via an ICBM nuclear missiles, right? As well as Yahweh Shai coming on that father ship with the angels that are that army that he's coming with, right? Sending out those laser beams, destroying this place, man. Right? That's ultimately the goal, in the end, the end all be all for America. And we understand that prior to that, right? Prior to, America being, completely and utterly, destroyed, we understand that there's, a major prophecy that has to happen prior to that, which is what? Jacob's trouble, the hour of temptation, and that's going to be a time of, great distress, and tribulation, being spread across the world, right? Again, Revelations 3 and 10, and that's ultimately going to be the time in which Esau, Edom ultimately, crashes the current market, you know, um, and ultimately offers, an NWO, a solution to the problem, is what he would call it, right? Which is what? The RFID microchip, which is the MO to the TB, right? As you read in Revelations 13 and verse 16, and we're in that time, right? Where Esau is continuing to, destroy this current, uh, 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 I guess, current currency, this current setup, this current world order, you know, so that way he can bring about his new world order, which is going to be what? A digital, society, complete digital society, man, you know? Um, and this is where things are heading, but in order for him to truly bring it about, we understand that this current, society, this current, setup, right, has to be destroyed. And this is what we're seeing, you know? Verse 13, it says, "You are a city by a great river, a great center of commerce," right? And that's America, right? And you got the World Trade Center, you know? People come here to do business, you know? It says, "But your end has come. The thread of your life is cut." And that thread of, of America's life is ultimately going into that dollar, right? And going back to 2024, when Saudi Arabia ultimately dropped using the dollar to trade, their oil, trade and sell their oil in, that ultimately was, a major, chess move, right? When it came to the devaluing of the American dollar, again, proving that America is no longer on top, you know, and that right there, going, from that moment moving forward to now, right? The dollar has increasingly less value. More and more, countries are stepping away from the dollar. More and more countries are not, they're saying, we're gonna go to the yuan, or we're gonna go to, a different currency, right? Which is ultimately causing, prices here, for these people, right, to go up, and that's across the board, right? We're talking about, you know, regular consumer goods, electronics, food, so on and so forth. It's causing things to go up, right? Which is putting more stress on these people, man. You know? Let me jump to this article um right here into headlines. It says half of Americans say the fun in their lives has disappeared, right? Meaning these people are in a constant, position of stress, you know? It says, according to a report from study finds nearly half of U.S. adults are struggling to find joy in their routines, with financial pressures and overwhelming schedules emerging as primary culprits in what researchers describe as a growing national fund deficit, right? A national survey conducted by Talker Research on behalf of Dave and Buster's paints a concerning picture of American leisure time. Released on May 26, 2026, the findings show that 48% of respondents feel their lives are seriously lacking in fun, while 12% cannot remember the last time they enjoyed a completely free day. Right? Cost stands as a dominant barrier, cited by 57% of participants, followed by packed schedules, work demands, and burnout. Among those who say having fun has become harder than a decade ago, representing 52% of the sample, 51% pointed to reduced affordability of activities, while others noted shrinking social circles and increased responsibility. Now, I want to ultimately, because it says right here, the main culprit is what? Prices going up, right? Let me jump to this other article, you know, um, that I have right here on the Newsbreak app. It says more Americans are going hungry now more than during the scamdemic as people face a remarkable rise in food insecurity. New York Fed says, right? It says there are more Americans experiencing food insecurity now than there were during the scamdemic, a new study from the Federal Reserve of New York found. In the survey from February 2026, the New York Fed asked American households about their spending habits. Just as consumer sentiment reached an all-time low this month, and as the economic effects of the Iran war were starting to be felt at home, the survey asked Americans questions such as if someone in their household dipped into savings to cover expenses, had trouble finding enough food to eat, had children miss meals, received food donations, or received SNAP, right? It says the Fed said the results are concerning as the percentages of economic hardships increased across the board compared to when the Fed conducted the survey of consumer expectations early in the scamdemic. We find, which again, more and more people, and we're talking about, people were losing their jobs at an all-time high, during the scamdemic, right? Places were closing down, people were losing their jobs. Yes, you had some people getting, a lot of people were getting, what is that? The scamdemic, unemployment and whatnot, but that wasn't enough to really cover, a lot of people's, expenses, so people were going hungry. People were, and then on top of that, you had to have the jab in order to go and get food and so on and so forth. That was a heavy time, but it's saying that this time that we're in now is worse, right? When it comes to that, right? It says we find a remarkable increase in food insecurity, particularly among low educated and lower income households and households with young children, the researcher wrote, which is a majority of people, right? You have to understand that when the scamdemic happened, right, that ultimately was, to take out that middle class, right? A lot of these smaller mom and pop shops and so on and so forth, people lost their businesses, right? People were not able to keep up with, the rising costs of the product in that time, because you have to understand inflation did take place in that time as well, right? It did spike up, it did get worse. And again, right, a lot of the middle class, right, was ultimately moved to that lower bracket, to that lower income house, or low class, right? So which made made the lower class even bigger, you know. Um, so now you got more and more people that are facing that food insecurity. People are that facing, you know, uh, uh, but not necessarily being able to, pay for, their everyday lives, that they were used to prior to the scamdemic, you know. It says 1/10 of respondents reported not having enough food to eat or that their children miss meals, more than double the 4% who reported so in June 2020. More than a third of households reported dipping into their savings to pay for groceries compared to 21.8% early in the scamdemic, right? So the numbers have drastically, you know, increased, right? It says such financial stress is reflected in concerns about affordability due to the high cost of living, persistent inflation, and high interest rates, and in high delinquency rates for credit cards and auto and student loans. The researchers wrote, right? So more people are using these backup plans, right? There are supposed to be backup plans, right? Credit cards, savings, taking out loans, and so on and so forth, right? People are having to rely on that because the everyday wage, right, is not going up. Inflation's going up, right? Prices for everything's going up, you know But that stems from what? The value of the dollar going down. It's not that the value of these products are going up. It's that the value of the dollar is going down, which is making prices go up. You know? And again, these people are feeling it. Most of these companies are pushing that cost onto the consumer. You know? It says, and I'll read this last paragraph and we'll go back. It says the findings come as more low and middle income households feel the pressure of higher housing and food costs and experience higher effective inflation rates. Inflation reached 3.8% in April, the highest level seen in almost 3 years. The Fed economists say the findings show signs of a growing K-shaped economy, right? As lower income Americans face financial stress and affordability issues, while higher earners seem to drive productivity and wage growth, right? Those who, ultimately at the top that make the most money, they're the ones that are keeping things running, right? Where everybody else is basically fucked, you know, which, you can go and look up and research that K-shaped economy, you know, which is, it's heavy, man. This is exactly what we're seeing, but this goes back to, what we just read, right? The people are looking at cost as the reason why. They're like, damn, I can't go have fun. I can't go outside. I can't, I can't even really drink like that, right? Can't even really afford it. This is the position these people are in, right? It says, and we'll read, it's not that much longer. We'll read a little bit, right? It says, when fun does occur, the benefits prove substantial. 72% of those surveyed reported reduced stress levels. 57% felt more motivated, and 89% said shared experiences strengthen relationships. Many participants estimated they would need roughly 17 additional hours per week to restore balance to their lives, right? It's time that they don't have. Time that you're not just going to be able to pop 17 hours, out of nowhere, It's not going to happen, right? So it's really, they're not going to be able to do it. It says, we've always believed that fun is one of the most powerful ways people connect, said Melissa Powers, Vice President of Marketing at Dave & Buster's. Our State of Fun report makes it clear that people are craving more shared in-person experiences and fun in their lives, but factors like cost, busy schedules, and a lack of fresh entertainment options often get in the way, right? Busy schedules because these people are having to pick up second jobs. You got people that are having to, quit their jobs, right? Couples, right? One of them has to quit their jobs to stay home with the kids because they can't afford daycare. They can't afford this, that, and the third, right? Which is ultimately hitting them. It's hitting both ways. Now you have to quit your job, and you have to, you can't pay for daycare. Now you can't afford, other shit because now you're living off of one income. Having to take out loans, credit cards, so on and so forth. People are just being put in a very bad situation, right? It says the survey of 5,000 adults across the 50 states conducted between April 21st and May 1st, 2026, highlights how everyday obligations continue to eclipse simple pleasures for millions. While a minority, 28%, reported that finding fun is growing easier, the majority face persistent, ordinary obstacles that quietly erode opportunities for enjoyment. And we understand that that's a very small number, but let me hit this, man. This is Isaiah, was it 24, if I'm not mistaken? Isaiah 24 and 7, right? It says, I'll read in the NLT. It says, the grapeviners waste away. The grapevines waste away, and there is no new wine. All the merrymakers sigh and mourn, right? These people are in a state of mourning, right? Which goes back to Proverbs 29:2, that, right? When the wicked are in authority, right? The people mourn. And we understand that this whole situation, what's going on, right? We understand that, Esau, Edom, is causing a lot of this, right? Esau is the one that's, furthering this war, that's over there and causing, the strait to be closed, and it is again just, it's ultimately, Esau's fault. He's the one that's doing this shit, man. But it's the Lord Yahweh Bashem El Shai that's putting the spirit upon him, right, to do it, right? Because Yahweh Bashem El Shai is bringing this scene to a close, man. It says the cheerful sound of tambourines is stilled. The happy cries of celebration are heard no more. Right? There's less and less joy. Right? It says the melodious chords of the harp are silent. Gone are the joys of wine and song. Alcoholic drinks turns bitter in the mouth. The city rifes in chaos. Every home is locked to keep out intruders. Um, Let me read that one in the KJV. Right, that's hard. It says, verse 10 in the KJV. It says the city of confusion is broken down, which the city is talking about America, right? Every house is shut up that no man may come in, right? It says there is cry for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. The mirth of the land is gone, right? In the NLT, verse 11, it says, mobs gather in the streets, crying out for wine. Joy has turned to gloom. Gladness has been banished from the land. And this is exactly what we're seeing right here. We're seeing these people ultimately in a gloomy state, right? These people are not able to, find any kind of joy, right? What did it say? It says we're in it said it in the article, a growing national fund deficit, and this is the state of the people, man. And eventually it's going to lead to them, ultimately, rising up against the current establishment, man. Job 20 and verse 22 in the KJV, it says, in the fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits, right? Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him. Let's go into that word wicked, right? Strong's H 6001. It says what? Laborer, sufferer, right? Workmen, right? These people that are out here, ultimately laboring. And it's gonna get to the point where they're gonna say fuck it, right? You're not able to pay for anything, right? There's no fun, right? People are fucking crashing out, right? Constantly crashing out. And eventually it's gonna be to the point where they say fuck it. Right? Let's go to the 2nd Edges 15 and verse 16, right? It says, for there shall be sedition among men and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings or princes, in the course of their actions shall stand in their power. They're not going to give a fuck, man. They're going to say fuck it, man. And this is where things are going, right? It's not going to get better, right? It's only going to get worse, right? 2nd Edges 14 and verse 16, right? Greater evils, right, shall happen hereafter, man. It says a man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able, for because of their pride the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid, right? Jacob's trouble, the hour of temptation, right? Leading up until the fullness of Jacob's trouble, which is the fulfillment of Revelation 13 verse 16, right? The mandatory implementation of the RFID microchip, right, which is the MO to the TB. The time is going to continue to get worse, right? Prices are going to continue to go up. People are going to be more, in a stressed position, right? Feeling more and more pressure until they snap, man. These are the times that we're in, right? It says a man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation, right? It's going to be every man for himself at that point, man. And this is why, again, the message, right, the warning is going out, right, is we've been commanded to do, Ezekiel 3 and 17, give them warning from me. We've been, we're showing you, right, that things are about to get really bad. And if you don't repent, and turn to Yahweh Shem Shai, you Israelites, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, as well as you Israelite foreigners, right, through the lineage of your father, you're Israelites, right? If you don't return to Yahweh Shem Shai, hey, you're going to be fucked. Right, you're gonna be of those that ultimately, they're gonna be in straits, that are ultimately gonna be, in a very bad position. The Lord said He had care for His elect. The Lord is gonna take care of the elect, man. He's gonna make sure that the elect are taken care of. Right. Let's go ahead and prove that. Right, Wisdom of Solomon, right, 3 and 9. Right. It says, they that put their trust in Him shall understand the truth. And such as be faithful in love shall abide with him, for grace and mercy is to his saints, and he hath care for his elect. right? The elect of the nation of Israel, those who are ultimately going to be, delivered in these times that are to come, right? Read that in Isaiah the 65th chapter. You know, his servants shall eat, but ye shall be hungry. His servants shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty, right? His servants are going into the elect, and that ye is talking about the 2/3, right, of the nation of Israel, the wicked of the nation of Israel. You know, Yahweh Shem Shah, man, is moving. So you better repent before it's too late, man. You know. But that's all I got, man. I just wanted to touch on that through the Spirit, man. Lord will is edifying. Lord will straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shah, Bahashim, Rachak, Wadash, that belongs to the other apostles, the other bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.